All Germany sang of freedom and brotherhood that magical autumn of '89.
At first it was like, oh, you can buy all the things you have all the time seen, and we could go over the border, and it was like, oh, now we are free and we can do all these things.
Less than a year after the wall fell, East and West Germany were unified. Under one flag, the West German one. One anthem, West Germany's. One law, that of West Germany. The West German government, that for 40 years sat in the backwater of Bonn, moved itself back to the old capital of Berlin to become the first all-German government since the fall of Hitler's Reich. The tumultuous Lovin of '89 was consecrated with the marriage of the two Germanys. It was a hastily arranged marriage, a shotgun wedding, in fact. Wolfgang Thierse, an Easterner who is now president of the Bundestag, the lower house of parliament, says the rush to the altar was driven by East Germany's economic collapse.
Ein erfolgreicher Staat und ein gescheiterter Staat zusammen.
With the unification of the two German states, there was one successful and one failed country joining forces, so it was very clear. The West Germans were the teachers, the East Germans the apprentices. And that's why there isn't this sense of things being equal. And it explains the enduring feeling in the East of being less important.
One of those Westerners, a member of the legion of bureaucrats dispatched to the East, was Wolfgang Nowak. His job to reform a communist little school system in the eastern state of Saxony.
We couldn't create a convincing school system with having the old teachers who had, before unification, taught them that capitalism is the work of the devil, that all the Nazis live in Western Germany, that communism will win the world. I'm very famous for it, I fired some 10,000 people. This is still on my conscience. If you meet every 10,000 has at least a wife, 20,000 has a family, I think some 40, 50, 60,000 people still hate me today.
The wave of job cuts was brutal. Faced with better Western products, all this Eastern factory could get for shoes that cost 30 marks to produce was 4 marks. And so the shoe factory and factories everywhere started laying off. Unemployment, all but unknown in communist East Germany, soared. In the East today, it stands at more than 20%.
Die Arbeitslosigkeit ist mehr als doppelt so hoch wie in
And unemployment is still twice as high in the East as in the West, and business development in Eastern Germany is still not stable. We are still lagging behind. So then you don't get this feeling of being equal. And that explains this enduring sense of being less important, of lacking in self-confidence.
Western man moved in on Eastern man from top to bottom. Everything down to even the chubby little man on Eastern traffic lights was targeted to conform to Western standards.
I think the Easterns believed in unification, and the Westerners believed in a sort of takeover. And without knowing, overnight, the East Germans became immigrants in their own country. What they didn't realize is that the first generation of immigrants is a lost generation.
Das war noch nicht das Ende, nein.
I never expected that at the age of 54 I would no longer be needed. My greatest wish is to be able to work again.
Christa Klose, who lives in the eastern town of Bitterfeld, is a member of that lost generation. She hasn't had a job since the film factory she worked in closed 10 years ago. From time to time, she gets sent on retraining courses for jobs that never pan out. Her husband, Johannes, hasn't worked since '87 when he hurt his hip in an accident. He's on a pension now. Krista, too, draws money from the state. 10 years later, she still gets unemployment benefits of 61% of full pay. That allows them to live in their own home with a big garden and enough room to put up their grown children. It's part of a generous safety net extended to 17 million East Germans, even though they hadn't paid into it. Despite their relative comfort to the jobless closers, unification has been a disappointment.
Ja, wenn man das so kurz beantworten will.
In 1989, we were promised blossoming landscapes, and we see now how that ended up. Of course, it was disappointing for us.
Ich bin natürlich auch sehr traurig, auch dass in dieser Region die
I feel very sad that unemployment is so high in this region, that young people are leaving, and that the whole area is getting grayer.
For the closer sons, hanging out in their parents' basement, it may not be any easier. In Eastern Germany, the young face bleak prospects of their own. No jobs at home, and finding work in the West is not easy either. If they're unlucky, they could be joining the ranks of a new lost generation, Germany's youth. When we come back, the new divide between East and West, money, hundreds and hundreds of billions of it.
Fingers of James Ennis tackle the works of Wieniawski and Sarasate, and soprano Misha Brugger-Gossman rhapsodizes on her CD debut, So Much to Tell. Misha Brugger-Gossman, Isabel Barakdarian, James Ennis, on CBC Records, available wherever fine music is sold.
I don't get it. Busy. When I'm not fixing, I am building. My Skill X drive with high speed and high torque settings helps with my projects. I like to build things. Whatever I want to build, I can build with Skill X drive.
That's me, Jay, over 20.
Only bits and pieces of the Berlin Wall remain now, preserved to remind Germans of what a fearsome symbol it once was of their country's great divide and the Cold War's most famous hotspot. Where once getting anywhere near it meant getting shot, kids now scrawl their names. These days, Berliners mostly rush by it, oblivious of how for nearly 3 decades the wall ruled their daily lives. Around this relic in Potsdamer Square, in what during the Cold War was an empty no-man's land, a whole new world has arisen. Office buildings, shopping centers, theaters, and coming soon, a new Canadian embassy. The square, which used to be the heart of Berlin's darkness, now glitters at night. Money, money, big money was spent here. But the glitter is an illusion. Many offices, whole buildings in fact, stand empty for lack of renters. Those bright lights hide more than just emptiness. They hide a dark taboo. Klaus von Dohnanyi headed a blue ribbon inquiry into unification.
The taboo is that one should not talk to the East Germans how much it cost the West Germans to build up East Germany, because then they could feel like people who always have to take and not to give, the people who receive benefits and don't deal out benefits, etc. But I think you have to tell the truth.
The truth is that trying to move the decrepit industrial society of communist East Germany into the modern age has been a bottomless money pit that's pulling down the whole German economy. Since unification, salvaging the eastern states has eaten up close to a staggering $2 trillion in tax money. That's about what the Canadian government has spent in the last 15 years running a country with roughly twice the population of East Germany. East Germany's chemical industry epitomizes the problem. At its peak, 120,000 people worked here. When the wall fell, they had been promised their living standards would rise to equal those in the West. Instead, as their plants collapsed around them, most of them lost their jobs.
Overnight, Eastern Germany became confronted with the ruthless Western-style capitalism. We're all used to it, and at the same time they lost their traditional markets, former Eastern Europe, because everything broke down.
Closing and demolishing the factories was the easy part. How to replace them and what to do with the people who once worked here has been more difficult and costly. Under the communists, thousands of chemical workers lived in these apartment blocks. As they lost their jobs, they left. Where once the laughter of children filled the air, there are now only silent ruins. Hans Walter is one of the handful who stayed. His last job 8 years ago was demolishing the factory he had worked in most of his life.
Everything was kaput, just as they're doing around here now. Kaput, yeah. Gone, gone, gone. Everything gone.
To him, the destruction of his world seemed as though World War III had started.
I remember as a child during the war, the bombs destroyed everything, just as the bulldozers are destroying everything now.
It's not what he expected in his old age. All around him, emptiness. Where once 46,000 people lived, only 16,000 remain. It's a social tragedy that has created ghost towns throughout East Germany, inhabited by the old and the unemployed. Nearby, signs of recovery, factories where people have good jobs, places that might as well be on another planet. But what looks like salvation turns out to be just an elaborate band-aid. This is the Bayer aspirin factory. It produces enough of the painkiller to supply all of Europe and Asia, and makes money at it. Based in West Germany, the company balked at building here. Bayer's boss once said the area was so hopelessly polluted it should be wrapped in a shroud. So why did Bayer change its mind and come to the newly joined states, or as the states are called in German, Bundesländer? Georg Frank is Bayer's manager here.
Chancellor Kohl convinced the chemical industry to invest in what we call the Neue Bundesländer, so Bayer decided to invest in Bitterfeld.
So the Chancellor twisted arms?
A little bit he did, yeah.
Former Chancellor Helmut Kohl, the architect of unification, sweetened his arm-twisting of Western companies with massive subsidies. Bayer got a third of its costs covered. But here's the rub. Those subsidies were used to build automated plants where robots like Adolf do most of the work. There are few people to be seen. As a result of robotics, this huge plant only hired 800 people.
And we had more than 25,000 people applying for the jobs, and we did more than 7,000 interviews.
So you hired 800 people. What happened to the other 24,000?
Some of them got jobs at other companies. Some of them moved to West Germany to get a job there. Some of them are still in unemployment.
This went not just for Bayer, but for the whole chemical industry around here. The East is now set to produce the same volume of chemicals it did before the fall of the wall. The big difference, it's being done with only 1/10 of the labor force it employed then. As for the rest, they come to try their luck here at the Job Search Center. It's brand new with state-of-the-art computers, with the same old problem. Too many applicants chasing too few jobs. Unemployment benefits and pensions for the old is where most of the money goes in propping up the East. Nearly half the population is on social support. Unemployment benefits are not only generous in Germany, they go on for years.
That's one of the problems. Our pressure on people in Germany is comparatively low. We think it's more social and more fair if you sort of give the people the money to live and then wait until they make a decision to work.
Here in West Germany, there is a growing unease about the subsidies to the East. Nestled in the West German countryside, just 30 kilometers from the old border with the East, Duderstadt, a picture postcard town with a 700-year history and modern problems. Many people here feel that bailing out the East with their taxes has cost them too much. All German individuals and companies pay a solidarity tax that helps pay for the subsidies and social benefits in the East. Frank Günther, who runs his family's road construction business in Duderstadt, feels it's time to rethink the bailout for the East.
Wenn man sieht, was für Kapital in den Osten geflossen ist und was da drüben.
When we see how much money has flowed to the East in such a short time, we have to say that it is the West that was neglected.
Also ich sehe das so, diese Solidaritätssteuer war
The solidarity tax was the right thing to do in the beginning. I was willing to help get something new going, no question about it. They said that it would last 3, 4, maybe 5 years, but it's been 15 years now, and it's incomprehensible to me that it's still not finished. In my opinion, that no longer has anything to do with solidarity.
Most of the company's road building equipment is standing idle. Günther says he can't compete with construction companies just down the road that benefit from generous state subsidies because they happen to be located across the old border in the new eastern states. Much of the work on roads in Germany, such as this custom brick cutting, is highly labor-intensive and therefore costly. What Günther particularly resents is that the Eastern companies can get away with paying their workers 20 to 30% less than he is obliged by law to pay his own. Even if he were to hire Easterners to work on jobs in the East, he'd still have to pay them Western wage scales simply because his company is based in the West. For Frank's father, Hans, who founded the business, that's an outrage.
We were shut out of the market through trickery. I have to say it's trickery. It has nothing to do with a normal market.
That trickery, according to the Günthers, has not only cut them out of the East by making them pay higher wages, it's also eaten into the road building business they had before unification in the West. That's because their Eastern neighbors used subsidies to lure away 50 local businesses. The flight of those companies to the East cut Duderstadt's tax base in half and reduced money available for road building.
Hope dies last, of course. Well, I always say that I belong to the survivors. Right now, we've really landed at the bottom. Doesn't go much lower, or we'd have to shut down.
Back in East Germany, in the town of Bitterfeld, a different business, but similar complaints about unfair business practices. Rainer Thiele, too, runs a family business started by his parents.
My mother was actually the inventor of this classic torte cake mix.
But he didn't exactly inherit the Kati Cake Mix Company. The communists nationalized the plant, and the family hung on for decades managing it. Then, After unification, he bought it and expanded it. He resents how some Western businesses have behaved in the East.
Western businesses arrived here bankrolled with so-called Eastern subsidies. And then after their special 5-year agreement ended, many of them shut down and headed back west.
His business is thriving. The cake mixes are a big seller in the East because many East Germans remember them fondly from the old communist days. In the West, though, Thiele says his sales in Western Germany are being hurt by a backlash against the flow of money to the East.
We're at the point at which tensions are rising between the East and West Germans. And now they're saying, don't buy any Eastern products. The more Eastern products you buy, the more our jobs are in danger. And the same game is played in reverse. The same is said in East Germany.
But not all the friction between East and West is about money and jobs. Sometimes it's just about identity, as in the Ampelmann affair. Ampelmann is the little roly-poly guy with a funny hat who adorned East German pedestrian walk signs. After unification, the authorities started replacing him with the West's leaner, leggier version. All these years later, though, the Ampelmann is still around, coexisting with his Western counterpart. In fact, he has become an icon. He's on lamps, he's on T-shirts, on keychains, on you name it. For many East Germans, the Ampelmann became a symbol for the identity they feel they lost. Faced with his popularity, the politicians backed down and brought the Ampelmann back. No big deal, just a small gesture to acknowledge that there still is such a thing as an East German identity. The unease about unification exists on both sides of the German divide, so much so that 1 in 5 Germans would like nothing better than to bring back the Berlin Wall. When we come back, a different ghost of German history, a specter older than the wall, the troubling rise of neo-Nazism. The spectacular glass dome of the Reichstag symbolizes both the transparency of democracy and its fragility. The strength of that democracy is now being put to the test by the government's campaign to rein in the spiraling cost of reunification. Down under the dome, Chancellor Gerhard Schröder has been firm. He's staking his political future on his economic reforms.
In Zukunftschancen, what we began together will pay off in the form of future opportunities in freedom and wealth for our children and their children.
The challenge to Schröder comes not from the opposition in this chamber, it comes from opposition outside. For Germans, it's been a summer of discontent. Every Monday, for weeks on end, there have been left-wing demonstrations against the government's reform program. Down with Hartz IV, they chanted in Halle, a city in eastern Germany. Hartz IV is the most controversial part of the reform program, a law that will cut unemployment and other welfare benefits. The aim of the cuts is to make life uncomfortable enough to force people to take a job. But for the demonstrators, Hartz IV has it the wrong way around. Here in the East, this union official is saying, it's not the will to work that's missing, but work itself. And if those jobs are missing, the demonstrators here believe, it's the fault not of the workers, nor even all that much of the capitalists, but of the politicians, and of the way it all went wrong after '89. For Annette Loser, her husband Frank Statko, and many others here, there is a nostalgia for what might have been.
Allerdings beobachte ich eine.
In 1989, there was great optimism, a joy that we are going to take control of this. We are the people. We are now going to shape a new East Germany.
There were all sorts of people who would have liked to have kept East Germany, but in a reformed way, who saw the good parts of the state as worth keeping, and that which wasn't so good could have been improved. I would have liked to have kept a reformed East Germany.
Das war der Traum.
At least that was the dream at first. But increasingly, a majority wanted quick money and quick consumer goods. And the new freedom was sold out for bananas and fast cars.
Annette and her husband certainly don't have much use for the new unified Germany. Neither of them works. She is on long-term sick leave from teaching. Frank has been unemployed for 6 years. He was a Communist Party organizer in the old days. After his party job disappeared, he went back to his old job as a welder. But the state-owned company he worked for was privatized and then closed, confirming all of Frank's prejudices against capitalism.
Das Verhältnis von Vorgesetzten zu Untergebenen ändert.
Under the guise of capitalism, the bosses allowed themselves to make the worst kinds of threats. If someone complained, they could be told to pack their bags and go.
Aber wir veranstalten jetzt ein Wissensquiz. Ich nehme so viel wie Mama.
But then, East Germans of old might have had a hard time imagining the comforts Frank and Annette have in a capitalist society without working. They have a 3-bedroom apartment with all the amenities, all to themselves, something that was rare under the communists. They also get a clothing allowance, healthcare coverage, and discounts on theater tickets.
I am living well enough. I don't go hungry. I can afford the odd hobby, but I do have to be careful. I'm not a particularly sad, unemployed person. I keep myself busy. That I can do.
Ich empfinde mich nicht als arm.
I don't feel poor. What worries me is that we won't be able to afford to make certain things possible for our children. For example, my son's piano lessons. I don't consider it a luxury. Culture should be available for everyone.
That culture for everyone includes 8-year-old Augustine's piano lessons, which are subsidized by the state. There's an irony in their situation. They probably live in greater comfort without working than they might have working in the socialist society they still yearn for. Many East Germans share a sense of disillusionment. It's not just the joblessness. It's that even having a job doesn't get them what they were promised at unification, a standard of living as high as that of West Germans. Now they're hearing from their own, from politicians like Wolfgang Thierse and Easterner himself, that they should compare themselves not to West Germans, but to Poles, Czechs and Hungarians who have had to work their way out of the communist morass without West Germany as a sugar daddy.
Es hilft nichts, schaut nicht nur nach Westen. Das ist nicht der einzige.
I always tell people it's no good just to look to the west. That's not the only yardstick. Look to the east as well. That's a second yardstick. And that can be helpful because it makes you recognize the scope of the problems and the difficulties you have.
That, though, doesn't wash too well with this crowd in Halle.
In Halle, there are no jobs. I would go on the streets myself as well. I'm forced to accept jobs which are not there. This is a absurd theater play which we are living now. This is the reason why people go on the street.
The demonstrations go on. As both the weather and the political climate get colder, though, there are fewer and fewer demonstrators. But the disillusionment keeps on growing, and not just on the political left. The East German discontent has been a boon to the parties of the far right. They've made impressive gains in recent elections, but their influence is nowhere near that of the anti-immigrant right of France or Austria, or for that matter, Holland. If, however, the flow of money to the East should end up draining the Western cash cow and impoverish the whole country, then all bets would be off. The alarm bells are already ringing. In September, Germans in the eastern state of Saxony took to the streets to protest the strong showing of the extreme right National Democratic Party in state elections. The party won 9% of the vote, almost beating out Schröder's Social Democrats. Nazis raus! Nazis out, they yelled. The chant followed the 12 newly elected deputies of the NPD, as the party is known by its German initials, as they arrived to take their seats in the Saxon parliament. The first time in 35 years the far right has won any seats in a German legislature.
Die NPD ist keine Nullkommapartei mehr.
The NPD is not a nobody of a party any longer, he says. The NPD are called neo-Nazis not just on the streets. The government tried before the election to have the NPD banned under a law that makes it illegal to spread Nazi propaganda. But it failed.
I am not a neo-Nazi. I protest this expression. I am a national democrat who wants to work for Germany with all his might. We are working for a better Germany. We are not neo-Nazis.
Peter McLeod and his wife Andrea are both NPD stalwarts. He is in the party's executive in Saxony-Anhalt. She recently won a seat on the town council of Halle. They say they stand for jobs for Germans first, ahead of immigrants.
I was called a Nazi slut when I was out collecting signatures, but there were also some pretty good reactions from people who said, yeah, we'll support you, we will give you our signature.
This is the ward Andrea represents. It's an impoverished area, fertile ground for the extreme right. Yet the secret of the NPD's current success seems to be that it has watered down its message and disassociated itself from the violence of the far-right skinhead past.
We have no skinheads. No skinheads.
Not quite true. This skinhead demonstration, for instance, was organized by a shadowy organization calling itself the Free Resistance Movement. But among the demonstrators, NPD flags and NPD slogans such as no tax money for synagogue construction. That message, strictly speaking, is not anti-Semitic. Just wink, wink, support for the separation of church and state. It's part of the NPD's double-track strategy of maintaining its skinhead support while attracting a broader following with a kinder, gentler image.
We are open to everyone. The profile of our members goes from an unemployed welfare recipient to professors, doctors. So we are a party of the people.
The politicians are scared of us. I don't know why. Maybe they think we're going to pull a new Hitler out of our pocket.
Every German will deny that there is a danger of neo-Nazis. The danger is that we get used to them, and the danger is that it's not politically correct to think why they are successful. And they are successful because a lot of East Germans think they have no voice. They are denied a voice. And therefore they trying to look for new voices.
But the new voices of the extreme right are, of course, an echo of old voices, the voices of the Hitlerian past. It doesn't take too many of them to raise questions about the resilience of German democracy.
Aber dann sage ich auch, insgesamt, das demokratische System...
The democratic system in Germany as a whole is so stable, so well anchored, that these right-wing extremist parties are not a genuine danger. The challenge must be taken seriously, but one shouldn't dramatize it in the wrong way either.
But democracy could be in trouble in Germany. After the fall of the wall, it had a promising start in East Germany. In the first election, an astonishing 99% of them voted.
16, 20.
2 years ago, it was down to 45%, and it could get worse.
The people will think the actual democratic system is not able to solve or helping to solve the German problems. And then the German democratic system is at stake. It doesn't mean that we will have a new Hitler or something like this, but trust in democracy will decline.
When we come back, why what's happening in Germany is not just a German problem, how it could affect the rest of Europe. And Stalinist ugly. You look around both sides of the old divide now, and you can see the exuberance of unification. Berlin looks sleek. It is a city reborn, all dressed up for its dream role as the political center of a united Germany at the heart of a consolidated Europe. But the costs of integrating the East have left the federal government floating on a river of red ink. The private sector, too, is in trouble. Just about every day brings bad news. Factories closing, companies moving abroad, big layoffs. No, not just in the East, but also in the West. The cash cow that's been bailing out the Easterners. And that threatens to sink the dream of a new Germany, and much more.
Our responsibility is more than just a German, it's a European responsibility. We are really the integrator in Europe. I mean, we are the center country. We are really the integrator. If we don't function, Europe is not going to function. There's no question about it.
Germany is Europe's powerhouse. If the Germans should falter, the rest of Europe would suffer too. Not just economically, but politically. The glue that holds the 25 countries of the European Union together is mainly the dream of prosperity. If that dream should fail, so inevitably would the cohesion of Europe. Germany may be in trouble, big trouble, but it is not about to fall apart. It is still a rich country with a resourceful people.
Gelegentlich erinnere ich daran.
Occasionally I remind people that we in Germany are indeed living in historical terms in a state of happiness. The citizens unified and united in one country, in borders which no one disputes, at peace with our neighbors, surrounded by friends. When in German history has this ever been the case? That's what I call an historical fortune for us.
If you want to see where Germany is at now, Duderstadt's Monument to Unification is the place to look.
I think there is invisible wall. It is a new wall. It has a new borderline. I think at the first time of history, a country became divided by unification.
Erstens noch mal 15 Jahre dauern.
It'll take another 15 years. So altogether that'll make 30 years. To an individual life, that's a long time, but in the history of a country, that isn't long at all.
15 years after the fall of the Berlin Wall, Germans are still dancing, still reaching out towards each other, hoping that once the bruises of their encounter have healed, they may yet end up in the embrace of an harmonious union. For CBC News correspondent, I'm Joe Schlesinger in Berlin. We'll be back after the break.
Doctor!
Paddle, stack.
Ethiopian famine shocked the world. A whole nation cried out for help as millions faced starvation. Reporting inside Ethiopia, I feared help would be too little, too late.
The scope of the catastrophe in Ethiopia is almost numbing, but some facts can be grasped clearly and without sensationalism. Voluntary agencies alone cannot cope, nor can Ethiopia.
What I didn't see then was the start of the greatest international peacetime rescue mission in history. Across the developed world, unions, school children, churches threw themselves into famine relief.
I don't think any country mobilized internally as Canada did.
And now, the tiny girl Burhan Waldu I found nearly dying in the 1984 Ethiopian famine and later traced and befriended has suddenly been seized by a celebrity she never saw.
Because I am now called a symbol, I feel that I have a responsibility to do more in my life and future.
That's Beyond Tears, Sunday on CBC News Correspondent.